I think it's exactly what nature intended. Men are more logical in their processing because they don't have, to anything like the same extent, this innate connectivity to the children that the mother has from the very, very beginning. Then they tend to come at things in a more logical, deductive way, an objective way, but this isn't objectivity. I was on holiday with my family, my wife and my 4 children in Spain. We were up in the hills and my son had a fever. We were up in the bedroom and suddenly she leapt up, she ran across the room, she ran down the stairs, she ran through the kitchen, out of the house, across the courtyard, across another yard, into the pool area and threw herself full length into the pool to catch my baby daughter just as she was about to take the last step that would have led to her drowning. Where did that come from? I didn't feel it, but there it was. And that's what I'm talking about. She knew some connection between her and my daughter led her to know that there was danger, where it was, and she was there literally within a split second of it being a complete catastrophe.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Andrew Wakefield, the British filmmaker, researcher, and activist. Your discoveries have opened up entirely new perceptions of childhood autism, the gut-brain link, and vaccine safety. Despite attempts to silence your work, you've refused to waver, costing you your career, reputation, and medical honors. In 2016, your documentary Vaxxed was banned from the Tribeca Film Festival, which featured revelations of a vaccine scientist at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. Your upcoming movie, 1986, The Act, exposes the truth behind the National Childhood Injury Act and the implications for the development and distribution of a coronavirus vaccine. Dr. Wakefield, welcome to London Real.
Brian, it's great to be on. Thank you.
Great to have you. before we get started, I just want to announce that we are streaming now on our brand new Digital Freedom platform, which is a censorship-free, independent broadcasting system that is of the people, by the people, for the people, and available exclusively on our website at freedomplatform.tv. Can everyone watching us now please share this link via the sidebar to any and all of your social media channels? Let me repeat that. Can everybody watching now please share this link via the sidebar to your social media channels? This is important. Simply ask your friends and family to give us 15 minutes and then they can decide. Dr. Wakefield, I pledge to you and everyone watching us that none of this conversation will be edited, censored, removed, or banned, and that anyone in the world can watch the full version of this episode free at freedomplatform.tv/Wakefield. Thanks to the generous donations of over 33,000 people around the world that I affectionately call the London Real Army. For anybody wanting to become a founding member of the Digital Freedom Platform, they can visit freedomplatform.tv/give to donate and fight with us on the front lines to protect our human rights. Here at London Real, we've been a platform for free speech since 2011. And Dr. Wakefield, I'm excited to have you here today. First of all, maybe I'll just start off with stating the obvious. I would have loved to stream this on YouTube to our 2 million subscribers who really want this information. I get stopped in the streets all the time, but we are being censored. And I'm new to this, you're not new to this. Maybe you can tell me, why is this happening? And do you ever get used to this censorship?
Well, first of all, Brian, kudos to you for developing a censorship-free platform. And the great thing about the free market is that when the big platforms say, you can't play here anymore because we don't like your message, a lot of people say, thank you very much. you've just given me a real opportunity that I was hoping to exploit for the last 10 years, and I'm going to set up a new platform. And here we go. And that's exactly what you've done. So I think that's what it does. What it does is it takes these people out of the marketplace, not immediately, but ultimately. Once they censor themselves, because people do not get what they want. And when you start telling people what they can watch and what they can't watch, I was just watching the platforms are censoring people like Michael Moore. I was reading The Hollywood Reporter, where people, prestigious documentary filmmakers, are getting censored in the same way because they don't like the message. Well, a lot of people do like the message, and a lot of people are going to insist on an alternative, and you're providing that alternative. So well done.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch, and I agree with you. It's been a great opportunity. Unfortunately, 90-some% of the world gets a lot of their video from this kind of video monopoly / search engine known as Google, YouTube. And it takes a little searching to find it, but they can find it. And when you ban it, sometimes it means people look a little bit further. So I agree, it's a tremendous opportunity. But again, I'm new to this. My work wasn't censored until April 6th of this year. And now I've seen it in a big way. And I'll be honest with you, Andrew, when I was talking about COVID-19 and 5G, I thought it was bad. When I started talking about vaccination, it almost went up 5x. And when I had Robert Kennedy on, basically my YouTube rep said, don't even think about putting that on YouTube. And so I can only imagine what it's been like for you. And also, when I learn more about your story, you went through this when there wasn't independent media options, when you couldn't go on YouTube and tell your story. So I'd love to get into that at some point as well, and just talk about, how you dealt with that back in the day. But still,
just on that, a very good point. When I went back and made the current film, I was looking at the archive of newspaper articles about vaccine safety, and there was proper reporting, really good journalism, and that stopped. And it stopped. Sebelius, I remember Sebelius, when she was head of Health and Human Services, she announced that the media should not give equal weight to people who question vaccine safety, who took an opposing view to the mainstream, to the CDC, to the pharmaceutical industries. And that was really the beginning. And then we saw, for Vax, the censorship at Tribeca. Now that was unheard of. When you start censoring films, independent films from independent film festivals, that's the death knell for that independent film festival. Again, it won't happen immediately, but now we're going to see a trickle down effect from that. But for us, and the paradox was that, in fact, it was the best thing that could possibly have happened, because Robert De Niro had the courage to go on to the Today Show a few days later and say, we shouldn't have done that. We should have played that film. Everybody needs to see this film. And then the De Niro effect took off worldwide and it exploded. So it backfired on them. Censorship backfired, and it became the most talked about story on social media. And a lot of people saw Vaxxed as a consequence. But if you go to Wikipedia now, they'll say Vaxxed was a failure. No, it wasn't. It made more money for the distributor than they've ever made before on a movie. It was highly successful. And it really changed the dynamic of this entire argument, this entire debate.
Yeah, because I've experienced this censorship in the last couple of months, it's made me really go deep on, this right to freedom of speech and why it's so important. And I've luckily been able to talk to a wide range of people. And it's never been so obvious to me that it's important to have beliefs that are counter to your current ones in order to even convince yourself of what you believe in. And unfortunately, one of these things that the technology platforms do, by design or not, is they put you in a little echo chamber where you're constantly, almost by design, fed back what you believe, from your political views to your scientific views. And yet that's not a great way to really find out what you really believe. You need a dissenting opinion. And when that's taken away from us, whether it's Ofcom here in the UK, which, literally will shut down a radio station or a TV station for saying the wrong thing, or it's YouTube, it's a scary thing. And it's not productive for any kind of a healthy debate, for healthy policy decisions. And when it comes to the vax thing, when people label someone anti-vax, it's just amazing the vilification that goes on. And again, this is new to me, but now that I see it, it's just almost hard to believe sometimes.
It's essential. I remember, Brian, when I used to teach medical students, I would say to them, half of the things that I'm going to teach you are right and half of them are wrong. And the problem for me is I don't know which half is which. So it's your job to question me, to challenge me, and for you to determine ultimately which is right and which is wrong. And that's the way we learn. It's an iterative process, and you cannot start censoring just to channel everybody down a particular belief system, which doesn't become refined. It's the assumption that we know everything there is to know. The debate is over. There's nothing to discuss about vaccine safety. Oh, yes, there is.
Let's talk about this film and the name of the film. And again, the whole world knows how new I am to this. And, I had never heard of this act in 1986 until I had Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on literally weeks ago. And again, I'm a scientist by training, a little bit like you. I didn't go into medicine, but I was in engineering at MIT. And, I think scientists fall in love with science. And then sometimes we don't look at the execution of the science and the policies. And sometimes we don't even look into the history of it. And so I had convinced myself that vaccines sounded like good science, so I was all in on them. And when I started learning about some of these acts, I was shocked. The first 20 minutes with Robert Kennedy, I think my mouth is open the whole time. And now you're making a movie about this. Maybe you can tell us why make a movie about this act, and what is the story about, and what do you want people to learn from it?
Well, on the face of it, it's the story of the conception, the birth, and the imminent demise of the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act in the United States of America. The important, in these dark times, there is a much more important message, and I'll start by saying this so people can use this as a platform by which to take everything else I say in context. And that is, it's not what you think. It's a story about something far more important, far more powerful, and that is maternal intuition. It's a story about when maternal intuition, an innate understanding of the child growing inside you or of your baby, determines how you take on, in this case, a huge conglomerate, an enormous power structure of government and industry that has coalesced into something that is trying to force mandatory vaccination on the world, is forcing mandatory vaccination on the world. And it's a story about how that intuition is correct. And it may sound to a scientist, to an MIT scientist, initially to me, it sounded bunkum, it sounded no. This can't be more this can't be more powerful, this can't be more defining than science and all our training. Yes, it is. It's exquisitely powerful. It is the reason that we are here on this earth now. We're not here because of public health, and we're not here because of doctors. God forbid. We are here because a mother knows her child best, knows when they're well and when they're ill, when they're faring well and when they're not, and what to do about it. And I've seen this time and time again, and the thousands of parents that I've sat down and talked to about what happened to their child. Then the story is absolutely clear, and the science subsequently comes along and shows it to be right, almost invariably. And the story is not only an example of that, but also an affirmation of its value. So it's a journey. Here we had a very, very complex story about legislation, about litigation, about medical science. How do you tell that story to an audience and not put them to sleep in 10 minutes? Even the most ardent fan of this subject is going to go, oh, come on, really? So how to make it relatable? And this was the key. It was fascinating. And I was at a pop-up fundraiser in Hollywood, and there were two husband and wife celebrities there. And they said, we need to get behind this film. And I was trying to work out at the time how to tell this story. And I said, I know what you can do. You can be in the movie. You can narrate the film. It can be about a couple who are having a baby late in her reproductive life. And therefore it means an enormous amount to them. And they go on this journey. They go on this journey that we went on. And they ask the questions that we should have asked or could have asked, or maybe we did ask to some extent. So it's their journey. And now, Brian, we care about them. We care. We're emotionally invested because they are us. Their success is our success. Their understanding is our understanding. And so we follow this journey. And of course, and in 95% of the relationships I see, it's the husband who says, oh, what about polio? Get over it. Don't be ridiculous. What about the science? And this is a voice far more powerful than that. And it's get on board, buddy. Get on board. If you want to be the father of this child or continue to be my husband, you get on board with this, because there's a little voice inside me that says there's a problem here. And I'm going to listen to that voice, and you're going to listen to me. And they go on this journey. And so for him, the arc of the journey is more tortured, because he's had to go from this adherence to the vaccine mantra right the way through to a position where he's able to make enlightened choice. And that's what it's about. What the film is really about is something far more positive than all the dark headlines that we get now and all the anti-vaxxer this and anti-vaxxer that and Bill Gates this. We don't need that. What it is about is the power of people to determine their own fate. And that's what people need to seize on, because that is the power that people have, that mothers have, and that the government and the medical profession and the industry are terrified of and have tried to usurp. I'm the guy in the white coat. I know better than you do. No, you don't.
Yeah, it's an incredible storytelling structure that you put together, and I've seen the screener, and I highly recommend people watching this movie. And in the first 2 minutes, I didn't know what was going on, because, like you said, a lot of documentaries, they go straight into, like you said, all of the mind-boggling acts and studies in this, and like you said, except for a diehard fan, it can put them to sleep. But you're immediately taken into this couple, and they're about to have a baby, and you're seeing yourself in them. Maybe you're seeing your parents in them, and you're seeing them trying to make these decisions. And funny enough, Andrew, I just had children for the first time in my life 3 and 4 years ago. I've got 2 sons, 3 and 4 years old. And my wife, Mariana, has reminded me almost every day for the past 2 months that it was her decision to keep them from being vaccinated. And again, I think it was that maternal instinct where she was just like, no. And unfortunately, I think, and maybe you can tell me if this is true, the masculine energy sometimes tries to grab onto the logical sometimes, right? I know I do. And I would probably throw out the smallpox vaccine, which is what I threw at Robert Kennedy, and he managed to kind of chop that up a little bit, or polio. And I was regurgitating things that I was taught. And when I was a kid, there were these after-school specials, and I remember the vaccine needle coming out and going into the thing, and I remember those little cartoons, and it kind of brainwashed me. And then I fell in love with the science, and I assumed the science was pure. And then you got the guy in the white coat who you used to be, and we're taught to treat these people like gods, and then we find ourselves in this situation. So I know I said a lot of things there. What do you make of my reactions?
I think it's exactly what nature intended. Men are more logical in their processing because they don't have, to anything like the same extent, this innate connectivity to the children that the mother has from the very, very beginning. Then they tend to come at things in a more logical, deductive way, an objective way. But this isn't objectivity. This is something far more important. Let me give you a vivid example, Brian. I was on holiday with my family, my wife and my 4 children, in Spain. We were up in the hills, and my son had a fever. My second son had a fever. He was only small at the time, and we were up in the bedroom, and she was sitting with him on the bed, and she was mopping his brow. And suddenly, she leapt up. She ran across the room. She ran down the stairs. She ran through the kitchen, out of the house, across the courtyard, across another yard, into the pool area, and threw herself full length into the pool to catch my baby daughter just as she was about to take the last step that would have led to her drowning. Where did that come from? It was absolutely extraordinary. I didn't feel it, but there it was. And that's what I'm talking about. She knew some connection between her and my daughter, some indivisible connection led her to know that there was danger, where it was, and she was there literally within a split second of it being a complete catastrophe. And that's what I'm talking about. And that doesn't demand logic or objectivity, that just is. And that's something I've seen so many times in clinical practice. And it's true, it's real. And we have to believe in it, because if we trust it, if we trust that objectivity, if that objectivity says to the mother, if that little voice says to the mother, you should get your child vaccinated, fine. That's your choice. You listen to that voice. But if it doesn't, if it says something else, please listen to it, because it is far more powerful than the person trying to coerce you into doing it and telling you that that little voice inside you counts for nothing. It's so important.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of us have been trusting our guts in the last few months. And I think we'll get to this later, but I think a lot of us have been listening to the information coming out of television sets and government's mouths and regulators, and knowing that something's not right. And we've been making other decisions with our guts. And I think that's why some of my conversations in this studio with various individuals have really resonated with people, and they've been drawn to it because there's something in their intuition that is saying, something's not right here. I feel like I'm not being told the truth, and I need to explore some other possibilities and maybe make my own decisions about these things. So I do think there's a powerful place for that intuition. Why call the movie 1986 and this act? Because you had to choose a title, and you did choose that. You didn't call it A Mother's Intuition. So why that? And can you tell people a little bit more about what's in the film?
Certainly. So the 1986 Act, signed into law by Ronald Reagan, put on the statute, really removed to a large extent liability from the pharmaceutical companies for the vaccines that they made. It really came about because of the pertussis component, the whooping cough component of the DTP vaccine. That was a problematic vaccine. It was causing a lot of injury and a lot of death in children, far more than was acceptable. And the industry was getting sued. And so they went to the government and they said, you want children to have this vaccine, the states mandate the vaccine, and you require it. And yet we're picking up the tab for the litigation. Either you protect us from litigation, from liability, or we will stop making the pertussis vaccine. The country will be left with no vaccine, children will die, and it'll be your fault. How do you feel about that? And it was at the time supported by parents of injured children, because there was this huge confrontational situation in courts of law where they would fight tooth and nail for 6-7 years in each case, while the child who was damaged was getting older and older and older when they needed help. And it was a very, very hostile, contentious situation. So there was initial support for a no damage compensation system, a no fault compensation system, And that, on the face of it, was the reason for the act being passed. It gave a degree of liability protection to the industry. That has since become complete protection for the industry. So what it's about is an industry and a set of products that have now been removed from the constraints of the free market. Not only do you have a product that is inherently unsafe, that has not been adequately tested. Let me just say, it was 40 years before they did the first safety study on DPT in America. They licensed it, started giving it, and gave it for 40 years before they did the first proper safety study. But the importance of this is that they allowed this situation to continue. They allowed it to perpetuate. There were a lot of injuries, and the product was removed from the constraints of the free market. Now, you and I know in a free market, a good product will succeed and the company will thrive. A bad, unsafe product will not. It will sink to the bottom and it will finish. And either the companies improve the product or they will perish in the marketplace. Well, when you take a product out of the constraints of the free market, then you remove that. Then you have a nightmare, you have a problem, because what happens next is that you mandate that bad product. You mandate that product for which there's no liability. And now you have an industry that has the perfect business model. no liability, and a mandated market. All they can do is make a massive profit. And that's exactly what they did. They made a huge profit. And they became so powerful that they were able then to influence the regulators at the FDA and the CDC, the government. They would buy politicians. There are more lobbyists now on Capitol Hill for the pharmaceutical industry than there are politicians. And when that happened, they became immensely powerful. They then got a leave from the FDA to direct-to-consumer advertising on the television. So they could market their products on television in the media. And what that meant is the media came to be owned. The mainstream media came to be owned by the pharmaceutical industry because there was so much money coming in that their lifestyle, their infrastructure depended on that income. And at that stage, they had the ability to dictate the news content, the headlines. And if they didn't want something to play, it wouldn't play. And you and I are experiencing exactly that now as it permeates the social media platforms as well. So you have a catastrophic situation where you have no liability, mandated markets, control of the regulatory process, and access to the consumers. And now, as Bobby will have told you, I'm sure, that there is worldwide efforts by the pharmaceutical industries to get politicians to pass laws that mandate vaccines not for children, but from cradle to grave. No, actually from pregnancy to grave, from pregnant mothers right the way through to the grave. And you will not be able to function in society if you do not comply with those mandates. That is the policy. That is the stated policy. That is the way this is going. And the importance of this film, which pits this huge behemoth against the mother's intuition, is really a David and Goliath story writ large. But it's my belief, it's my sincere belief that the power, the collective power of that intuition amongst the world's women, because this is a global problem, will change this for the good.
Wow, so that one act in 86 caused a chain reaction of so many events and now so many more additional vaccines, because what was at first just a removal of liability now became an industry in itself, right, for these companies. And it's just been now propagated, and now it's become kind of a machine of its own.
And there are hundreds of vaccines in the pipeline.
And I think Bobby was saying when he was born in 54, I think he said it was 3 vaccines. And he was saying like these days it's in the 50s or that they want to try to give children, or the 70s. I'm not sure, but it's gone up massively.
It has. It's now 72 doses in the United States, 72 doses by the time you come to leave school. Like you, I had 3 vaccines, and they were problematic as well. But I had measles, mumps, chicken. I had all these diseases. It's astonishing, Brian, isn't it, when you listen to the rhetoric of the vaccine makers and the public health policy makers? It's amazing that you and I are sitting here talking now. We should, if we believe them, we should be in the grave a long time ago, but we're not. And in fact, you look very fit to me, and I feel fit. So somebody's wrong on this one.
Yeah. And, one other thing that Bobby said was, he was good friends, I think, with the CEO of, I think it was CBS or NBC, one of the big networks. And he had told them that in a non-election year, 70% of their advertising revenue is pharmaceutical related, and how he would never have Bobby on the show, and he would fire anybody that would have him on the show. You've had your own run-ins with like an Anderson Cooper. Do you think, does he know what he's doing? Or is it the fact that everything around them is built on these revenues, so sometimes they do it without being overt about protection? Or does everyone kind of know the score in the mainstream media?
I think they know the score, or at least they know that there is far more than they're being allowed to report. But Bobby was telling me just the other night that a large proportion of Anderson Cooper's salary derives from the pharmaceutical companies. So he's simply not going to say anything that goes against their message. In fact, he says everything that goes in favor of their message, as far as I can see. So, and he's typical of so many news reporters and people who've spoken out about this, brave people, true journalists, people like Sharyl Attkisson. I did an interview with her when she was still at CBS, and she said, we finished the interview, and she said to me, Andy, within 15 minutes of us editing this piece, I will get a call from the money men upstairs, and they will say to me, our sponsors have seen this, they don't like it, it's not going to play. And she was wrong. It was 5 minutes.
Yeah, and there are powerful forces, and now they extend themselves to social media channels and technology platforms. And I stopped asking why a few weeks ago. I don't care why anymore. Now I'm just going the other way. But you can go down a rabbit hole of why, but it's being prevented. And just as an aside, when we had just recorded Bobby on our Digital Freedom platform, so it hadn't even been on YouTube yet. I was speaking with my rep there, and we're still on YouTube, although I have been told we are one upload away from being completely deplatformed. This is 9 years, 8,000 videos, 250 million views, just so you know. And we are one video away from being deplatformed. They said, if you put up vaccine content, you actually have to pre-tag it as being vaccine content so we can know it and get an extra review. And if you don't do that, then you're in violation. So obviously it's these forces go very far, not just to the mainstream. And yeah, we're feeling it here. As far as the movie, you want people to go on this journey with this couple, to understand these aspects of the mother's intuition, and to also get all of the facts, so then at the end they can make a decision themselves. Is that the aim of this film?
Exactly. What we were able to get is, during the process of making this film, I talked to some of the lawyers who were involved in the early cases, involved in DTP litigation before the act. And they had documents, discovery documents, that had never seen the light of day. And they'd never seen the light of day because the industry at the time could not stand a jury trial. That would have finished them. They would have been bankrupt. They would have paid out millions in compensation way back then, all those years ago. And so they would settle the cases on the court steps, and these documents would remain sealed for all time. Now I have access to them, and I'm able to not only present them in the film, as this couple go through the discovery of them, reading them, presenting them to us in a way that we can access. But there are also those original documents that are not available in the public domain will be on the website. So if people take issue with it or want to check it for themselves, great. There it is, go and check it for yourself. And I promise you that you'll find far more in there than we were able to get in the film. And so it's presenting brand new data about the real reason why this act was passed in the first place. And it was forced upon the government through lies and deception because the industry had to avoid going before a jury. They could not have withstood going before 12 peers and having all of these stories told. So they settled the cases and they told the government, we have made the vaccine just as safe as we possibly can. Well, let me tell you this. The first filing, the first patent filing for a safer pertussis vaccine was 60 years before it came to market, 1937. How many children went to the wall in that time?
I don't know. Well, I'd love to get into some of the history of some of these vaccines like polio and go into the details, but the big question is, one of the reasons that people are listening now is because we're in the middle of, this so-called COVID-19 pandemic, and we are all being shown the exit sign over this way, which is the vaccination that's going to make everything normal again. And I was just reading an article in the Times here in London and watching it and kind of watching the general public's version of what's going to happen. And as I was telling Dr. Zach Bush yesterday, I made myself watch the Soderbergh movie Contagion about 3 months ago before all this started. And it gave me bad dreams in the beginning because the mortality rate's high and you get to see Gwyneth Paltrow dying on the kitchen floor. But one thing I noticed was at the very end of the film, doctor, there's this vaccine. And it's this innocuous saline solution they put in your nostril. And it's almost like seconds after it's done, everyone's like, now I'm okay, and now everyone's okay, and everything will go back to normal. And I'm sure Soderbergh didn't know what he was doing at the time, but it seemed to reinforce this concept that we have, that the vaccine is this panacea with a 100% success rate that makes everything like puppy dogs and unicorns. And so my question is to you is, what do we need to know about the current vaccine agenda and even the efficacy of vaccines? And is it true that our media seems to tell us this other version of what they are?
Well, there's an interesting story about the movie Contagion, Brian, that I'll just share with you. And that is a friend of mine who's actually in the movie 1986, The Act, David Kirby, a journalist and an author. He wrote a book called Evidence of Harm. And Evidence of Harm was about the damage done by the mercury in vaccines and the attempts to cover up that. And it was optioned to be made into a film. And the company that optioned it ultimately buried it. They put it in the bottom drawer, never to be made. And I'm told that it was the payback for doing that was the film Contagion. And so Contagion has an interesting history. Is that true or not? But that's the story that I've heard many, many times. So yes, the CDC saves the day. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that great? You know, CDC was going to save the day with Zika. I think $8 billion were awarded for a Zika vaccine. And then even Fauci tells us the other day, and then Zika disappeared as a problem. It went off the front pages. Suddenly it disappeared. Once they got the money, the 8 billion, it had gone. And it was the same with the Ebola vaccine. It's been the same with so many vaccines. There's a great deal of money at stake here. Even if you don't bring a vaccine to market, you can get a lot of money out of the taxpayer to develop your products, build your company, etc. So there are advantages beyond being successful in producing a vaccine to the market. But I'm very, very, very cautious. And the value of the film is that it shows people that we've been here before. We haven't been here before once, we've been here before many times, and here is the real history of it. So if you are going to determine where we're going, look where we've been. Look where we've been with this experience before, because it's often turned out to be a complete catastrophe for the consumer. For those people desperate to get this life-saving vaccine, who put themselves in harm's way for something that's not tested, the insurance companies won't touch in terms of liability, and yet it goes into people and they are damaged. And it turns out there was never a problem in the first place. So another reason for watching this film is it gives you a perspective. It gives you an insight. It gives you a way of judging the current events around COVID-19 in the context of the history of pandemics and vaccination.
And what have you observed over the past 90 days when it comes to the pandemic, the lockdown, and the talk of vaccines? I know we could probably talk for 4 hours about that, but I'm curious.
Well, my first impression was this. As soon as it emerged from Wuhan, I was reminded of a story some years ago when we were doing an investigation and we came in contact with an ex-employee of MI5. And his job at MI5 was as an Uber hacker. He could hack into anything, anytime, anywhere. And he worked for the intelligence service in the UK for a very long time on this, and then left. And he came to us one day, and he'd been doing what he does on computers. He didn't seem to be able to break the habit. And he said, there's just been this outbreak of flu out of China, of SARS, and there was an earthquake in central China that destroyed or damaged a bioweapons facility, and that's where the leak came from. He then immediately got a call from a colleague, still within the service, saying, you want to forget what you've just seen and don't mention a word about it, and by the way, behave yourself in future. So I was reminded of that story, and that of course never made it into the public domain. But there it is. Is it true? Is it not true? He had no reason to tell me this, other than he'd found it, doing what he does. So the chances of this being just some escape virus from a bat in a market is nonsense. There are no coincidences. It came from the Wuhan research facility. And what that tells us is that we do these experiments And there are huge, huge consequences to pay. Whether it got out deliberately or whether it got out by accident, whatever happened, doesn't matter. It does matter, but it doesn't matter for the purpose of this discussion, is that these experiments should never be done because they will lead to catastrophe. And when man interferes with nature in this way, particularly through genetic engineering experiments, doing things they know not what will lead to, and then we have a problem. And the other anxiety I have, Brian, is this, that there is a story that the NIH funded these studies in Wuhan when they were actually banned by the Obama administration in the United States. There was an outcry amongst scientists to say we should not be doing these genetic manipulation studies, these what are called gain of function studies to alter the pathogenicity, the dangerousness of this virus. And so I'm told that the research was then moved offshore with NIH funding into Wuhan. Now, if that's true, then I would say that's treason. That is treason. And the consequences, whether true or not, for mankind have been absolutely enormous. And so these kinds of experiments have to stop right now. They should never be restarted. And that was the position that scientists took many years ago. Beyond that, is a vaccine going to be the panacea for this problem? If it's safe and if it's effective, maybe it'll be very good, but never make it mandatory. Do not force a medical procedure on anyone, particularly in the situation we're in at the moment, where there is so much question, there's so many questions about vaccine safety and efficacy. So we're employing, the scientists are employing in the various companies, so many different strategies involving the injection of naked RNA and DNA into people. Once it's in there, you can't switch it on. And you have no idea what it's going to do. And we experienced one of these Frankenstein viruses with the dengue virus vaccine, that they had catastrophic problems with that vaccine after it had already been administered to thousands and thousands and thousands of children. It was then discovered that it didn't protect against dengue. And when they then were exposed to that virus, they got the disease far worse than anyone else, with a lot of deaths. So these things have huge consequences for mankind. And those consequences are transgeneration. They will be felt for a very, very long time. So I am hugely cautious about any approach to vaccinating against a disease, which now the mortality has virtually disappeared. New cases are being diagnosed according to antibody testing. Those aren't cases. Cases talk about morbidity, disease, symptoms. These are people who just happen to have had exposure and recovered from it and have antibodies to it. Those numbers may be increasing because we're testing more, but they are not reflective of what's happening in the disease itself, which is apparently becoming milder, has mutated, and therefore is going to be perhaps immune from any response that we can induce with a vaccine. And I believe there are better alternatives. I believe that a healthy lifestyle, that vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, possibly hydroxychloroquine, certainly from the data, are better alternatives. I do not think that a vaccine is going to be the answer to this, but people have invested so much money, and all of their the perception the public might have of their credibility in producing this, that people are now crying out for it. And that's an alarming situation. And this device of fear, this marketing tool of fear, has been seen time and time again. And that's what the movie makes absolutely clear, that it's a device that has been used throughout time.
When you hear about them fast-tracking vaccines, how does that make you feel?
Terrified, absolutely terrified. Circumventing the laboratory testing, the animal testing, put it straight into humans. And then you see in one of the trials, I think the 20% serious adverse reaction rate in the high dose group.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.